suddenly got quiet.
Right, I'm sorry I'm late, but I've been doing my democratic duty in the House of Lords, if that's not too weird a thing to say. And we lost. Me, I'm Labour, and we lost. Okay, so thank you very much to everybody who is here, to, of course, the panellists, most importantly, and the audience as well. And I think it's a great opportunity to have a cross-party discussion focused on strengthening this really important bill. It's not quite once in a lifetime, but I mean, I think it's something we've absolutely got to get right. And my thanks to Alex Tait, who is co-founder of the politically neutral not-for-profit campaign, Reform Political Advertising, and he's been working closely with the Fair Elections APPG and supported by Full Fact. I think that there's a real crisis of trust in our politics and our politicians, and I think that this truly does undermine our democracy, and that it's been threatened partially by misinformation. And I'm pleased that Full Fact and the Joe Cox Foundation are working together on this. I would say that disinformation is part of the problem of abuse, harassment, and intimidation of elected representatives and candidates, and therefore it really is threatening our democracy. So I'm wearing two hats. I'm a trustee of Full Fact, but I'm also the chair of the Joe Cox Foundation, which has done some great work on this as well. And I guess my third hat is a member of the House of Lords, and I would be very willing to table any amendments which don't get through the Commons to see what we can do in the Lords. But that's quite hard when you've got lots of people against you. But I think it could be no better time to have such a discussion on this representation of the People's Act. And this is perhaps the last time, well, it's a really important time to influence it here. When do you finish it here?
Well, probably when we come back after.
When you come back, okay. So the Minister, Samantha Dixon, in the bill's second reading, said in relation to mis and disinformation, there are already measures in the Online Safety Act, but this issue needs to be addressed more forcefully. Amen to that. And I would say there are other issues to be addressed as well. The government's response to the Speakers' Conference reports that this government shares the conference's concern about the impact of mis and disinformation, including the role of deepfakes on candidates, MPs and UK elections, and it's committed to addressing it. So there's real recognition within the government that more needs to be done, but as it stands, I just don't think that the bill really addresses all the problems, and it certainly doesn't go far enough. The bill's stated aim is to restore trust in the UK's democracy, but trust depends not only on electoral processes, but on the information that voters receive and on the institutional safeguards. And I think it's clear that there are huge challenges in the information environment, in the democratic information environment, and it's all evolving so quickly. And elections are the key moment, are they not, when information can shape democratic change. I find it all a bit terrifying at the moment, the way in which misinformation and disinformation is having an impact, as we see on the doorsteps. I was on the doorsteps yesterday, and I got a whole load of disinformation and misinformation thrown at me. And I think that without the key amendments that we're going to be discussing this afternoon, I think that the next election won't have all the safeguards that we really require. And I think there's a mismatch between the scale of the challenge and what's in the bill at present. I would say that the key gaps at the moment are misleading political content and campaign content, emerging risks such as AI-generated content, transparency and accountability in digital campaigning, and managing misinformation incidents. Of course, I acknowledge that there have been some improvements as a consequence of the bill, but I think that these are quite small steps, really. And I think those changes relate to the imprint regime and increased powers for the Electoral Commission. But we need more. We need much more. These are not a complete solution. They're just sort of steps on which we can now build. So I think that this is a great opportunity, thanks to the organisers, to test proposals and amendments, to identify gaps and risks and to support cross-party discussion, because I think that this truly is a cross-party issue on which, no matter what political persuasion one might be, we've all got a lot to gain if we get it right and a lot to lose if we get it wrong. So I hope this afternoon we can have a real practical discussion about the solutions that we could try to address together and the amendments we can try to get through in both the Commons and perhaps the Lords to see how we can make the bill as best a bill as possible, as it were. So, the question I pose to the panellists, if the aim is to strengthen trust in our elections, what further steps are needed to ensure that the bill fully meets that objective? So, first of all, I'm going to ask you, Justin.
Okay.
Hey, over to you.
Hello. Well, if we're going to ask Emily to speak first, because I think she's got to...
I'm sorry, Emily. Emily, you've got to go.
I do.
So go, girl.
I'm sorry, but I mean, I agree with everything that Jen has said, as always. She is a font of all knowledge. And I've put down several amendments, many amendments to the bill, because I agree with your analysis. We are in an era where our electoral legislation was written at a time where people went back to their constituencies once every 5 years. They did a short campaign with leaflets, and then they came back here if they'd been elected. That is not today's reality. So I've been trying to work as cross-party as possible. Zoe and I have met. I have met with Dr. Ellie Chowns as well, who's now obviously on the committee, as well as key members of the Conservative team, as well as key ministers and members of our team, the Electoral Commission, and also with Philip Rycroft, because I think it's really, really important that we recognise that his report is a very, very good assessment. So my amendments focus in several areas. One is deepfakes, and it tries to do two things in deepfakes. It recognises that fun deepfakes, sort of if you want to be an MP that dresses up as Superman and you jump over Big Ben, and that's the core of your election campaign, great, whatever, you probably won't get elected, but at least say this is a deepfake. You know, have at least say this has been created using AI. And then there's deep fakes that misrepresent, that other people are making of you that misrepresent. And for me, that is extremely, extremely harmful. You know, there's 72 TikTok accounts that currently use BBC footage of the Prime Minister and just change the audio. And therefore, you get to the doorstep and they say, I hear you're introducing a Christmas tax. You say, no, you're not introducing a Christmas tax. No, I saw it. I saw it on the BBC. I didn't just see it once. I saw it several times on the BBC. That is disinformation. Or people who are deliberately creating deep fakes, like the guy in Sri Lanka who has 126 Facebook sites, and he's got a deep fake of Lord Ali and Keir Starmer CCTV footage making out. He's got Sadiq Khan saying he only rents council houses to Muslims. He doesn't do it because he believes it. He does it because it makes him £300,000 a year. And he now has a YouTube channel that promotes how to do that. So this is the type of thing we're facing on deepfakes. So we have to stop the mischaracterization of politicians and politicians' views. And so that's what another one of my amendments does. We also need to recognize that it's not just deep fakes that are a problem online, it's algorithmic bias, which we're starting to see really good academic literature on what happened in terms of the platforms in the US. There's some good work coming out of Monash University in Australia around looking at that. It's very, very technical. Also the use of bots, and whether that's the use and purchase of bots by politicians themselves, because I'm sorry, I'm going to, you know, I don't mind if you repeat this, but there's no way Rupert Lowe has that many followers. They are bots. He has bought them, or he's been given them. That needs to be stopped. We see foreign interference, and we know about the Iranian bots that are all really, really keen on Scotland becoming a sovereign country. They seem to go dead every time the internet goes out in Iran. This is deliberate disinformation, and Rycroft Review is really good at that. So we need to have a live system controlled by with experts at the Electoral Commission that are watching that bot activity, that know exactly what's happening and can monitor the algorithmic bias as well that is happening. So I know it's not just about new powers to the Electoral Commission, but it is about these sorts of powers that are live, not after the fact, but live. Then we need a protocol that says what happens if we have a major incident, like what happened in Northern Ireland. No, sorry, not in Northern, in the Republic of Ireland, where there was a deep fake of one of the candidates saying they were pulling out of the race 2 days before the election. What would we do if that happened now? Let's not figure that out when it happens. Let's figure it out now and make sure that it's not seen as a way of influencing politics. And then political advertising online is very, very, very different than political advertising in newspapers or radio, because you can micro-target. And when you micro-target, it's only those people that can see it. So we need to have a proper repository where every single political ad, who it's targeted to, what the ad said, and how much money was put behind it, that is centrally held so that anybody can monitor what is being said, whether it's mis or disinformation, and how much they're actually spending on it. So that's a pretty hop, skip, and a jump through my amendments. I'm sure I missed one in there, but that's the spirit of them, and they're meant to work very much in tandem with what Justin's put down and what others are putting down within the bill, because actually, as you said, we have this once-in-a-generation opportunity to make sure that the public has confidence in our elections, because if we don't get it right, it's not about somebody stealing the elections, it's about actually stealing the choice of our voters to be able to properly make an assessment and choose who they want to vote for.
Emily, before I go, yeah, absolutely. No, I'm sure that everybody in the room agrees with you and is delighted that you put down those amendments. Do we know what the sort of government's reaction to those amendments is?
So the government's reaction before the Rycroft review was, we'll wait to see what's in the Rycroft review. It all is in the Rycroft review, everything that I've just mentioned. So I have offered to them to sit down and talk to them about whether they would like to adopt my amendments as government amendments, and that's what I'm hoping we'll end up doing, because actually they'll be much stronger as government amendments. Otherwise, I'll just keep putting them down, and you can put them down in the Lords if you'd like.
Would love to, but I hope it doesn't get that far.
Yes.
Good. Has anybody got any questions for Emily before she runs off? Yes.
It's probably clarification, because of course I agree with everything you said, but are these amendments about, in some senses, amending the Online Safety Act, and some of which Ofcom have got to do, or are they saying, by means of the Representation of People Bill, or is it saying, actually, let's create another regime which maybe the Electoral Commission, police, whoever, will enforce? And if it's not putting it together, I'm not saying necessarily has to, then you've got sort of multiple regulators and that old difficulty of things only work if they can be regulated.
Yep. So they would become electoral offences. So in the 1983 Representation of Peoples Act, particularly in terms of the deep fakes, it already has that you cannot misrepresent a candidate. And I should have mentioned, actually, there's another really important amendment, is recognising that elections are not just 6 weeks. They're all year round and all the time. So there's an amendment that asks us to look at whether all of these should apply all year round, all the time. And the reason it's not specifying that specifically is because there's still a bit of debate about whether the financial rules should also apply all year round, all the time, or if they should just apply during certain periods of the campaign. And I know there's discussion happening, but the reality is, certainly on the misrepresentation, on what's going on online, we have to have it all year round, because quite frankly, we don't have sort of television rules that allow us to, to be, or newspapers behaving responsibly or whatever it might be, but the social media sphere will not do that. So they would be electoral offences. They originally written as OSA offences, but they were ruled out of order by the Table Office, so they are all electoral offences.
It makes it easier in a way.
It makes it easier, yeah. It makes it harder then to potentially expand some of these to cover everyone, but...
Yeah. Any other questions for Emily? No? Well, thank you very much indeed, Emily.
Well, anyway, good luck with the rest of your meeting.
Thank you. How do you follow that? It was a fantastic run through very quickly of all all the issues that we're facing. And I think as both of you have said already, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, isn't it, that we've got to really tighten up our legislation. And I think we all recognise, don't we, the changes that have been happening over the past decade or so, and how our legislation just isn't keeping pace with that. You know, you think about the way the world was 10, 15 years ago, but we've got laws governing elections which were written for an analogue age when really the challenges we've got are very much digital. So the bill has some very commendable things in it, votes like 16, automatic voter registration, political financing, but as we hear, that's why we're here, is because we know it's not the whole answer. There are lots of gaps in there, disinformation being one of the biggest ones. And I think that we've got a plan, we've got a cross-party consensus, and we've got a strategy to try and get as much of this in the bill as possible. I think we all recognise the biggest challenge really is trying to marry up what's happened in the world of social media with the fusty, old-fashioned electoral laws, and we can see how that's changed the political discourse in recent years. Threats and intimidation of political figures is a huge issue. We've lost colleagues in the past. We've got increased vulnerability to foreign influence and interference, which we probably only see the tip of the iceberg of. We've got, I think, the Americanisation of some of our politics with political advertising online, and of course the new threats that AI and deepfake pose, which absolutely undermine trust to a level which I think if we don't tackle that now would be very difficult to recover from. So I think we all see the impact on trust in politics and actually in wider social cohesion, and I think a lot of this is about suppressing voter turnout, if I'm frank, which is where, as we saw with the turnout of the last election, it can be a corrosive thing for anyone to deal with. So, as we know, the multifaceted problems we face are not properly addressed within the current bill. So, in terms of what I have tabled, and I have to say, as Emily said, it is a team effort. We are trying to cover everything amongst ourselves. I've really focused on the issue of conduct at elections. So new clause 61 would introduce a responsibility to draft a code of conduct for political campaigning. The government have said they are considering it, but this would establish the role of the Electoral Commission to create a code of conduct that makes provisions for standards relating to both honesty and, of course, the avoidance of intimidation, harassment or abusive conduct. It would apply to all candidates. I think it would be critical in setting a high standard in the way that candidates operate and how political debate is carried out at elections. Complementary to that, because of course it is a suite of proposals, are new clauses 62 and 63, which focus on paid political advertising. And look, we've got to a position where we've got a world where traditional media like TV is very tightly regulated through party political broadcast, but the absolute opposite of that is the online world, where it is completely deregulated, completely Wild West, and clearly in terms of how people absorb their news and information nowadays, we know actually that online is where most of the action is. So it's a complete anomaly that needs to be fixed. In fact, it was only a couple of years ago, 2022, that we actually required imprints for online political advertising. And new clause 62 will give the Electoral Commission the powers to establish what's known as an electoral advertising code of conduct, and that will ensure that there are standards for accuracy of factual claims, the basis in reliable evidence, the requirement to establish a party affiliation with online advertising, transparency around the use of AI, because as Emily said, I think there's more and more danger that that is being used for nefarious means. And actually, and this is important, issuing prompt public corrections when mistakes, and I'll use the word mistakes in the broadest possible sense, are identified, because as we know, the old saying that the lies halfway around the world before the truth's got its shoes on is more true than ever nowadays. We've also got new clause 63, which will give powers to the Electoral Commission to establish an advertising code committee to actually monitor compliance with the code. And actually what we want them to do is be proactive in that monitoring. And they're given teeth by a new clause 64, which will give this committee powers to enforce the code. Obviously, this all needs to work alongside the other amendments and new clauses in the bill. And I think Emily's in respect of repository of political advertisements is something I'm particularly keen on. There's already something that's been brought forward in places like Canada and New Zealand. And I think it would give us some much needed transparency around that content that's online. Actually, the total money spent and the way that it's targeted, which is at the moment opaque. And actually the only people who know who's receiving what in terms of political advertising are the online giants, and that cannot possibly be right in a democracy. And as I said in the second reading debate of this, they're actually incentivised by their business models to have content which is controversial and divisive, not actually to be factual, truthful and cohesive. There are also a number of other sensible amendments about expanding the powers of the Electoral Commission, critical election protocols, and transparency around the provenance of digital media published online, because it can't be right, can it, that if there are targeted adverts out there, that the people who are the target of the advert, and I mean the target in terms of the political person who is being attacked, may not even know that they have been attacked. And I've heard stories of people, as Emily sort of said, going on the doorstep and being told something about themselves which they can't possibly have known about because it was on a targeted ad that they hadn't seen. So we need to get lots of interest from MPs across the board. There is appetite in government, I believe, to look at this seriously. And of course, if we don't get joy in the Commons, we've got our friends in the Lords to do this as well. And I think it is really important that we do this now, because it's pretty clear, isn't it, from everything that we see in here, that democracy is a very fragile thing indeed. It needs our support, it needs protecting from us, it needs this place to really do its best to uphold the values of a proper democratic process. Because if we get to a world where we can't even agree what the facts are, we can't have a functioning or healthy democracy in that situation. So I hope that today is part of an ongoing process where we really strengthen our democratic process, which actually will be ultimately a benefit to us all.
Thank you, Justin. That was absolutely great. I think that the fact that the bill now includes votes at 16, we've got a duty really to get these things right, because we're talking about the next generation, and we've got to ensure that they've got trust in our system. If I could just say, on the code of conduct, campaign code of conduct, I mean, I think it's great that the government have signalled that they might want to act, that they want to have a consultation, but I think we need it in this bill because this is the vehicle and we need to use it, do we not? Yep. Okay, right, Zoe, I think it's over to you next.
Thank you. So lovely to be here this evening. Thank you for inviting me. So as a little bit of precursor and explainer, so I am in the fortunate position that as well as sitting on the representation of the bill committee, which has just finished last week, I was also a member of the Lib Dem members, the Speakers Conference as well. So have been sort of part of the process actually of trying to get a lot of the amendments a lot of the concepts that have now sort of been played out through Emily and Justin's amendments and others. I was delighted to see them come out of Speakers Conference and be put into the bill. For me, the Representation of the People's Bill, as with so many around this table, is really about, it's an excellent bill in many ways. I think all of us will say it doesn't quite go far enough on a number of different issues. And for me, a lot of the stuff around, I focused a lot on candidates. We know that our democracy is fragile. We're in a place, sadly, where a lot of people are concerned about understanding whether or not something is true when they see it and how they make decisions. We're sadly losing trust in politicians, and I think this bill is incredibly important for addressing that. And what I saw through Speakers Conference and why I focused on the candidate side was, while the public obviously need protection, I'm really grateful to Justin and Emily for tabling so many of the online safety elements of that seek to address the gaps in the bill. It was also really laid bare to me the impact on candidates and therefore people's willingness to stand for election, and therefore the diversity of our MPs and indeed people in local government. If people are constantly in fear of misinformation, disinformation, doxing, attacks on social media, then they are far less likely to stand for election, and that disproportionately impacts women and people from different diverse backgrounds, and that we should all be very worried about. So, as I said, I focused a lot on the candidate side of things, but I'm going to stick with a couple of the amendments that myself and my colleague Lisa Smart, who led on this bill, tabled. So, NC18 was about actually addressing something which Justin touched on, which is the fact that digital imprints have been around for a very long time. There's an expectation that when you look at a piece of paper, you should be able to identify who produced that documentation, not just the political party, but who is legally responsible and how you can contact them. Really important, fundamental part of our democracy. In 2022, we had the changes to the Elections Act, which meant that we had digital imprints, so people can now see on every single graphic on social media that it has been produced by a political party, or rather, it should be on there. I'm aware that sadly it doesn't always happen. And this amendment that we tabled was about actually updating that guidance to make sure that not only is that information available, but also if that piece of digital content has been produced with the help of AI, it should be indicated that that has been the case. You know, we are living in a world where the way we campaign is evolving, and that is right. You know, it has done since the dawn of democracy. Campaigning has evolved, but where people need to be able to trust the content they're seeing, and part of that is knowing that AI has been used and how it has been used. I just want to also sort of touch briefly on Emily Darlington and Justin's amendments, and I just want to say thank you to you for tabling them. When I met with Full Fact and many of the other organisations who've really led on pulling together the information to help us as MPs strengthen the bill, it was great that you picked them up and moved forward. And it's just a shame, in particular, that I think on the amendments that Emily Darlington tabled, I was disappointed in the fact that we weren't really able to touch on the Online Safety Act. And I think the problem there for me is that the Online Safety Act isn't keeping pace with the environment that we're working in. And I know that from speaking to George, there are conversations about potentially something coming in the next Parliament around being able to address the Online Safety Act. But given that there is this crossover between our democracy and our elections and the Online Safety Act, it does, for me, feel remiss that we're not able to address the issues during the course of this bill. But Baroness Royall, you also spoke. Jan, thank you. So Jan also mentioned the specific stuff I tabled around making sure that young people are equipped. And one of the things that's been absolutely stand out for me since I became an MP in 2024 is I go into schools a lot. And I am seriously impressed by the next generation. You know, I have probably some of the most varied conversations with my constituents, with young people, than I do with adults at hustings or frankly on the doorstep. And they ask deep questions. They are unafraid to ask blunt questions in a way that some adults will kind of beat around the bush, but they will ask them. But it's not universal. And access to education on elections and democracy is not universal. And we really, really need to address that. And with it, it's also about media literacy. We need young people to be equipped with the tools that enable them to see when something is potentially disinformation, potentially misinformation. How can they check it? How can they trust what they see? And I think one of the stats that stands out for me is that only half of 13 to 17-year-olds feel confident that they can distinguish between true and false political information. And that's really worrying when they are heading towards being able to vote. And I am so happy they will be able to vote. But actually, they are paying attention, they want to be equipped. And we, as the people who have created the legislation to make their vote possible, should absolutely be accompanying that with the support on media literacy and just generally understanding how democracy works. So I'm really hopeful that we can at least get a conversation with the government going forward on this to see if we can get it, if not on the face of the bill, at least in the guidance. But I'd really like to see it on the face of the bill. And if I may, Jan, having been a member of the Bill Committee, we wrapped up, as I said, on last Thursday, and I think one of the absolutely crucial things will be what comes next. Now, we're not going to see this bill again until after the King's speech, and I'm so grateful that it's a rollover bill. I think that's obviously very important. And we are going to see the Rycroft amendments, I believe, come through in report stage, which gives the opportunity to debate them in the House of Commons. But also, I'm hoping that many, if not all, of the amendments we're discussing today will get retabled so that we can also work cross-party, because I think it's very clear from within this room and also from the conversations we're having outside of this room that these are cross-party issues that all of us want to help address.
Thank you, Zoe. And I'm really pleased that you mentioned candidates, because if people aren't willing to put themselves forward as candidates, we're not going to get them elected. And I think we've got to remember councillors as well as MPs. And apparently 72% of councillors report having experienced abuse or intimidation. Sometimes you think, why would you put yourself forward? But I'm glad you did, Hannah. And congratulations on your election. Would you like to?
Thank you everybody for having me. I'm sorry I wasn't able to come earlier and that I'm not able to stay for the full thing. And thank you for all the work that you've all been doing on this, clearly for a long time before I even got here. And I'm speaking more on my experiences throughout a campaign, which some of you may have followed, and which I hope and I'm sure will sort of feed into the work that we all do together. As I'm talking about this, I will mention by party, because I've found that that's not to make digs, like this is a truly a cross-party effort. However, I have found that as I've spoken about my experiences, when I haven't named which party was undertaking each action, people have made an assumption about which party it was, and that assumption hasn't always been correct. So I'm mentioning those parties not to further dig or try and bring it up again, just really to avoid further misinformation spreading about who was responsible. So yeah, I did my best when I was deciding whether to put myself forward as a candidate to find out what would be involved. I was a councillor still for about 3 years and have experienced abuse and threats to my safety in that role. But what I was not prepared for, and what nobody around me was prepared for, was the sheer amount of misinformation that spread, and the rate that it spread, how quickly it was absolutely alarming. I was selected as a candidate on the Friday, and by the Saturday I already had people that I knew in our local Facebook groups telling me that their Facebook groups were flooded with graphics claiming that I wasn't a plumber. And we could never get on top of that, because once it started, I believe, on X, on bot accounts, it was quite a coordinated campaign. It spread within 24 hours into real life places where a lot of people and voters and residents trust where they get that information. Now that was obviously an angle that was an easy one to direct at me. It was very sexist and misogynistic, that I was just never able to counter. But it was really upsetting for me, because that's a job I've done for 20 years in an industry where I have struggled quite a lot and become quite proud that I've stuck with that, and I found that really difficult to deal with. And that spread into real life when I had several times I've had people really, really angry, screaming at me, "You're not a plumber." And I can tell in their faces, like, they believe what they have seen online. They feel conned, they feel lied to, and they feel like I should not have been a candidate and I shouldn't have won. And that's the impact against when we have seen some horrific attacks on MPs who've been murdered, that I think, is that going to happen to me? Because I can see that anger in people's faces, I can see their blood boiling. It wasn't just those attacks that apparently I'm not a plumber. There was a graphic that was shared. It was generated very quickly, but it was of a real house in Hale, where actually a family live. But I was told that people were told that I lived there, and it's worth about £3 million, that house. So it was part of an attack that said, this woman is a multimillionaire, like she's not who she says she is. But a lot of the attacks and that actually were harder for me were the attacks on my ex-partner, who thankfully I'm still really, really good friends with. We're very close in each other's lives, not least sharing 4 greyhounds together, which is not something I could manage on my own and coming to Parliament. But he was personally attacked. There was all sorts of rumours and misinformation spread about him, that he is the multimillionaire chief executive of AstraZeneca, which I find quite funny because he's definitely not a multimillionaire. But that he also killed children with the COVID vaccine, and this stuff spread everywhere. The impact it had on him is absolutely heartbreaking, and I still see it in his face. It's like he's a different person now. I'm sorry, because that's probably going to be the bit that upsets me the most, because it's the people. I mean, I didn't know that I was signing up to any of this. None of us knew that this would happen. The misinformation took everybody by surprise, but certainly the people in my life didn't sign up for it. Exactly. And that has been one of the hardest things, to see him become a bit of a shell of a person through something that none of us could control. And that's just really sad on a very personal level. And I think it doesn't matter where you are in life. Like, not everybody would be able to be resilient through that. Like, some people, that would be the end for them. And that is really worrying. That is really alarming. I'm quite lucky. I've built quite a good support network. I've had difficulties in my life that have made me quite resilient, and I felt like I could sort of face it a little bit. That's not to say it didn't really, really affect me, but I worry that someone else who maybe just isn't quite at that time in their life might not have the skills to be able to get them through. It does put candidates off, and if I think now, if somebody had told me all of that stuff would have happened, would I have put myself forward? If someone had showed me a picture of my ex now, looking, you know, like he's lost weight and he's stressed from 4 months of being harassed, would I have put myself forward for it? I don't know. I wouldn't expect anyone else to sign up for something like that. There were a lot of AI-generated images, particularly from the Reform Party. There was one that was quite famous that they did have to delete, but not a lot of people would have known it was AI, that showed their candidate outside a house that was covered in Reform posters. And I think it was that person whose house it was that came forward and was like, that's my house and there's no Reform pictures on it. But that had spread quite a lot until that person came forward. If that person hadn't have seen those images, that quite possibly could have still been shared. I was collared by some residents who were really angry, not with me, thankfully, but because they'd had some local Labour activists had been flooding their local WhatsApp groups with a message claiming that I was racist and that I'd been sacked from a workplace due to racist messages that I'd shared in a WhatsApp group, all of which was completely untrue. But that message, they'd said their phones were pinging the different groups that they were in. That message was just being forwarded, and they'd gone back to the groups that they were in, and they'd known they were Labour members. So it really wasn't just one party doing that. I think that's what I'm trying to say, like, because a lot of people have assumed that it was Reform that were doing a lot of this, but it wasn't. We saw on polling day, election vans being driven round with a picture of my face and a claim that I was going to force people's daughters into prostitution and sell them Class A drugs. And that was my face going round with those claims on it. And we had no way of stopping that day. When Labour were challenged on it, they'd said that they distanced themselves from it and said it was their activists and they weren't aware that it had happened. But I think we all bear responsibility for the culture that exists within our own parties, and that's something that I'm always aware of. And I think things happen in an environment. I'm not always saying that we're responsible for the actions of other people. I'm really not saying that, but I think we need to pay attention to the culture that is building. And that's for all of us to take away, to really think hard about that, because I think people had free rein thinking that they could just do whatever they wanted. And it's really worrying on so many levels, because I know certainly before I was political, when I lived in that constituency actually, and we had general elections, the stuff that I was getting through the door, like, I really trusted. I did not know that politicians would ever lie or bend facts. Like, I thought politicians told the truth. I'm not going to say I was naive. Like, well, of course they do, but I was just. Yeah, like, I was exhausted from life. I was struggling, and I would have trusted things that came through the door. Like, I don't think it's fair to expect everybody to be able to be critical enough, or to assume that politicians are liars, because I don't think that's good either. I think we should get to a stage where we know that the stuff that's coming through our door or that we're seeing online is the truth. And I think ultimately, I'm worried that people will stop believing anything. Like, this is the problem now. Someone said to me, if there was stuff that came out about me now and it was true, like, a lot of people wouldn't believe it. And that's not good either, because I expect to be held accountable and scrutinised for stuff. But if the trust has just got so low, how could people ever believe anything, even when things are true and they should? I think it it worsens community tensions. Like, I have seen that myself. I've seen, thankfully, that couple that stopped me about the racist messages, they knew it wasn't true, but they were worried about their elderly parents who'd read it. And they were worried because they didn't have anything to counter it. And I was like, but I don't know how I counter it. I don't know what I do. I don't know how I convince you that I'm not racist and I wasn't sacked from a workplace. So the community tensions, I think, can build there when people are being fed so much misinformation. What worries me more than anything really is our democracy, because I think people in that election voted or didn't vote because of things that they saw online, and not all of that was true. And I think those people who've screamed at me in the street, and I've been filmed, I've had people getting right into my face telling me, you've never done a plumbing job in your life, you've never done X, Y, Z. And I think those people, I actually think I probably have more in common with than a lot of, other people, because I just think I actually had a sad thought, and I thought we probably would have played together as kids at school, and something has happened in life where now I'm their enemy and they're living that out in daily life, coming that close to me, being so red with rage about something that they've seen online that isn't true. And I don't know how we can expect a democracy to function when it has sort of deteriorated this quickly, because it has, to me at least, in the time between 3 years as a local councillor, being involved in the last general election, and now this seems worlds away. Like, nobody that I knew was prepared for how much misinformation there would be during this by-election. And I do think, as much as I have named parties, and I really hope you can understand why, I think everybody bears a collective responsibility for making sure that this doesn't continue, and actually we need to go back and look at placing further restrictions on the social media companies, which I really believe are at the heart of a lot of this. But thank you so much for all of the work that you are doing together. I think it is in everybody's benefits to try and tighten this up, and so that at the next general election we don't have candidates who are put off, we don't have people that hear an experience like mine or someone else's and think, why on earth would you ever sign up for it? Because there are so many reasons why you would do this, why you would put yourself forward, and I want those to be the things that people think of, not the attacks and the threats on their life.
Thank you, Hannah. That was that's amazing. The things that you had to go through, and I think you're right. We've all got a responsibility to ensure that we have a good, sort of clean culture within our, within our parties. And what distresses me, it's terrible when parties do that to other parties, but also there's clear evidence that it happens within parties. That sometimes it's our own people who are spreading disinformation. So we've absolutely got to change it. And you're also so right that, politicians themselves, elected or people seeking election, they sign up to it, often not knowing what it really is. But their friends and their families certainly don't. And I think that is horrendous, the stories one hears. And I'm so sorry for your ex-partner.
Thank you.
God.
Could I just make one
Yes.
sort of last comment that I have just remembered as well, because I think it's about normalising and challenging the normalisation of it, because I was quite disappointed when I came here, and an MP who was involved in the campaign, I had a lovely conversation with her, but she referred to this. She said, now that the rough and tumble of the campaign is out of the way, and I said, hang on a second, that was not rough and tumble, and the minute that we start minimising it to rough and tumble is alarming as well, because I don't think we should ever get to a stage where this is normal. And I am so fed up with, in previous campaigns I've run when there was the mayoral candidate and stuff happened then, and I was just told it's just politics, and I think that I don't want this to be politics. I don't think anyone here wants that to be politics, but I also think you're right, because I have had good conversations about people who have said to me that their selection process as a candidate is so horrific that by the time you get to being the candidate, you don't actually pick up on stuff like this because you've had worse stuff done to you as a candidate internally. So I think that was a really good point as well, to note that the culture inside all of our parties needs to be aware that also manifests into this behaviour during a campaign.
And we do need a campaign code of conduct, do we not? Alex, over to you.
We do. How do I follow that? But actually, a lot of what I'm going to talk about, I think, does follow that, actually, in some of the points and some of the solutions. But just to introduce myself briefly, for anyone that wasn't at the last event, I'm the co-founder of a politically neutral, not-for-profit campaign called Reform Political Advertising, and we're advocating for various amendments, actually, that people are putting forward today for factual accuracy and transparency in election advertising. And we're a bit unusual, I think, as a democracy group. I think I often sort of say this because we do seem a bit unusual when I meet other people in the democracy sector, in that we're from an advertising and marketing background. So, for example, I used to run all of the advertising for Unilever in the UK, for Marmite, Ben & Jerry's, Marmite, Sif, Dove, etc. And I think this was part of the trigger for this was it's really crackers that you've got 4 sets of rules to ensure that a packet of crisps advert is accurate, but you've got absolutely nothing to ensure that a vote, an ad to influence your vote is accurate, which sort of backs up a lot of what Justin and Hannah have been saying. And it just strikes me from the conversation today, there's kind of two things that kind of, two sort of forces, I think, that make this just incredibly important. A, that we can do something about it, because we've got this bill going through, which really has not happened in a long time. Anyone in the groups that are here, like literally, as we were saying at the last event, almost nothing's happened in decades, literally, around election law. But there's the sort of increase in sort of technology, and AI is definitely getting to a bit of a tipping point. You just have to look into your social feed for that. But actually, something that I think is quite interesting, just from a campaign point of view, is actually how it's in the interest of MPs to do something about it too. Not just for the reasons actually in the quite amazing sort of personal story that Hannah's just given, but actually because of this 5-party system that we're in now, actually we're getting razor thin election results really and victories. And just to give you just a couple of examples, and I've sometimes done this historically because I think it really does seem to resonate with people and with MPs. If you look at, for example, the Runcorn by-election, that was won by 6 votes, which was 0.02% of the vote share where Reform beat Labour. The Doncaster mayoral election, Labour beat Reform by 698 votes. That was 1% of the vote share. I'm going to give you an example of the North Tyneside mayoral election, where Labour squeaked by on 440 votes, which was 0.8% of the vote share. And actually, there's some research that NRS have done that shows that about a third of the seats now are marginal at the moment. So, when you've got, you can, and we've heard, like historically, I think, when we started this campaign, how much of an effect does advertising have on someone casting a vote? Well, yeah, it's probably not the biggest driver. It isn't the biggest driver. But can it affect votes that amount? Yes, and it does. And we see examples where we're almost convinced it has, to be quite honest. So I just wanted to, I thought actually just to sort of bring it to life, I'm sort of illustrating, I guess, some of the amendments that have been talked about. But one of the, Lord Putman, who chaired the last event, chairs our campaign, and he chaired the Democracy and Digital Technology Committee in 2020. One of its key recommendations is the amendment that Justin's putting forward, the amendments actually that Justin's putting forward for factual accuracy in election ads, and for that to work in a similar way actually to commercial advertising, with a committee comprised of the ASA, or experts including from the ASA, Electoral Commission, UK Statistics Authority and Ofcom. If I just show you just quickly, just to bring it to life, I always think a visual sort of helps. And I do apologise for showing this every single time, but it's so iconic. I never really talk about it because it's been put to bed, I think, by the UK Statistics Authority head saying that it was inaccurate and the campaign shouldn't run. But actually, one that I think it's really interesting, like some of the, listening to the committee last week, I think it's really, really interesting, like hearing some of the conversation about, like, should a code be statutory, should it be voluntary? And this is the only duplication actually on the last event that I showed, just because it's quite a good one. But this basically was in the very close North Tyneside mayoral election. It was a fake news, literal fake news website, where the Conservative candidate, who interestingly has, I think it's safe to say, and on the record, and actually quite factual, that has used a technique actually from becoming a councillor through to actually being the mayoral candidate the last mayoral elections, to put together a website. This one was on Facebook, called North Tyneside Matters, and there was no mention anywhere of the party. You had to dig into it to see the candidate, and it was basically set up to attack its main opponent. This had a very dramatic video saying that the Labour candidate had benefited from a very large amount of money, £761,000, and various other sort of quite dramatic claims on it. And it was shared, I think, a couple of hundred times and commented on a couple of hundred times. But actually, if you look in the Facebook app library, it had reached
between, according to Facebook's reporting, between 100 and 500,000 people actually in a mayoral campaign. So that's kind of one example, I think, of, he has, and that technique has been used time and time again. People have been told off. It's a voluntary code. Is that going to work? Or do we need it to be statutory, I would say. I'm trying to be quite even-handed here, actually. So, and I didn't actually get to say to Justin that I was going to show a Labour one, but we talked about the Liberal Democrat one. Okay. But just from Gordon and Denton, this was a sort of Labour example. So, an actually tactical vote that's a polling company got in touch with us and were very sort of animated about it because it's quite similar to their branding. But it's not a real polling company. And on the day before the election, lots of these leaflets were put through letterboxes, and hopefully notes sort of all about the detail around that. But the fact that it's not a real polling company, and the two sort of most well-known polling companies were saying something quite different, it is certainly misleading. As an example, I'm going to go to almost from a Liberal Democrat point of view. I have to do a bar chart, I'm afraid. But I suppose the point goes actually that if you think about it, some of these are, you get these really big whoppers, as I sometimes position it, of like the bus, for example, the Brexit battle bus. But actually a lot of the misuse of statistics is really very, very important and really riles voters. This one's actually just a bit of a funny one, so I tried not to, in a way. It's from the 2019 general election, and it says, it gives an example. In fact, all I have to do, I think, is read the small print at the bottom. So, observation polled 405 respondents aged 18 plus living in North East Somerset. And the question was, imagine that the result in your constituency was expected to be very close between the Conservatives and Liberal Democrat candidate, and none of the other parties were competitive. In this scenario, which party would you vote for? And actually, the actual result, the Conservative 50%, Labour was, I forget the exact number, but slightly ahead of the Liberal Democrats. But again, a bit of a humorous one, I suppose. But and I know the Liberal Democrats are very, obviously sort of aware of all the jokes about bar charts, but it really does mislead voters. So in terms of the misleading claims and the need for Justin's amendment about factual accuracy, so we're talking about factual claims in campaign material. It's not opinions, it's not manifesto promises, it's factual claims in campaign materials, similar to the system that exists in New Zealand and has been up and running for 2 decades, and the system that exists in Australia and a couple of states as well. And then I've just got 2 other ones quickly to show you, so I maybe want to get to the audience and to have questions. This is one actually where we're looking for an amendment, we're looking for someone to sponsor it with us. So I think a couple of people, maybe Zoe mentioned that there were, also George was speaking as well. There was a couple of people who mentioned imprints not being updated. This is just an example from the London mayoral campaign. This landed through lots of Londoners' letterboxes with a made-up City Hall logo with no mention of a political party or no sort of branding or logo or mention of a political party. If you do not take action, your mayoral council tax will rise by 21.2%. And in this very small imprint that most people will miss, of course, and not read, it said it was promoted on behalf of Sean Bailey, but it doesn't mention anywhere on it the political party. It doesn't have to. It's breaking no rules at all. So we think a really simple, I know the Electoral Commission is quite keen on this one as well. I think we've got someone from the Electoral Commission here somewhere. But we think that's a bit of a no-brainer, just to close that loophole on just having to state the political party. Really seems no-brainer. And then just the last one, I'll just illustrate Kelly's point. I think the visuals maybe do help a little bit. So this is, again, just to illustrate the concept of why a database, an ad database, is useful and actually helps with transparency of election ads. So this was a claim in the Brexit referendum that was obviously publicised a lot. And the concept of this is really with what people call dark advertising. It's an ad that only the recipient sees and isn't open to scrutiny by journalists, academics, the public, etc. And so a database would give transparency to that. This claim, I think, has been widely talked about, so I don't know if I need to go into too much detail, but basically Turkey's accession to the EU would stall because of various things, including human rights. And the process in the EU is that every single member state needs to agree to it for Turkey to join. So that was just a sort of example there. So just because we're sort of running a bit behind probably
Sorry,
in terms of
Michael,
getting through the panel, well, I'll probably leave it at that. I had a visual actually for George. This was the George Freeman one actually, when I think about it. This was the deep fake of George Freeman, which again is one of these amendments which was very realistic, and I think George's phone went into meltdown when it announced that he'd defected from the Conservative Party to reform. He spoke at our last event very compellingly about it.
Good, thank you so much. Great illustrations, but moving from one George to another. George, you can say something.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So I think the point you make about the deterioration of trust in information is really important. We've seen at Full Fact, we monitor these things, we see misinformation, disinformation day out. We monitored 142,000 articles and posts in the last election, and this stuff is getting more and more prevalent and just being turbocharged by AI. So we pulled together a package of recommendations, some of which have been taken forward through the amendments that Justin and the others have tabled. We've been working with Demos, When I Save Tech Network, and others who are in the room. I'm going to talk about two in particular, but first give a bit of policy context to this. So a couple of years ago, the UN, the World Economic Forum, OECD said that mis and disinformation are the most severe global risks. We've seen with the policy paper for the bill last year that the government said our democracy is under threat from misinformation. Keir Starmer said the same to the liaison committee a few weeks later. And yet we've got this bill which doesn't really do anything about it. Very, very minor tweaks, very, very minor changes. And I think that needs to be seen in the wider context of legislative failings. We've got the Online Safety Act, which doesn't really address misinformation, real problems with institutions that I'm going to come on to talk about. And there's real public concern about this. So there's some electoral commission polling from a couple of years ago. Misinformation is the public's second biggest concern in elections. Ofcom found that it's the most commonly encountered online harm. 60% of people saw false or misleading information in the last election in the past week. And on top of this, there is a real perception of inaction. So the Electoral Commission found that 3/4 of people don't think enough is being done to tackle the issue, and only 5% of people think that enough is being done. And we commissioned some polling recently which corresponds with this, but also shows how these concerns, the perception of inaction, the extent to which people are exposed to this onslaught of misinformation is affecting their views on democracy. So the overwhelming majority are concerned about misinformation, and very large numbers are finding that negatively affecting their views on whether elections are free and fair, whether they're willing to vote at the next election, whether they trust the media, political institutions. So it's having a real corrosive effect. And this is taking place against this context of rock-bottom public trust in politics and the media. So there's a couple of safeguards I'm going to talk about which would give more visibility to government action, which would help restore trust and help safeguard our democracy. And there are two quite big gaps in the bill. The first is around the incident protocol, which Emily mentioned at the beginning. We've seen a series of reports in recent years from the Foreign Affairs Committee, Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, and most recently the Rycroft Review, which have highlighted how information risks are becoming more complex, more nuanced, hybrid, AI-fueled. So risks in an election might include coordinated use of bots, viral false claims about voting procedures, targeted deepfakes as well. But the UK doesn't have a public framework to deal with this. There's no public incident protocol setting out what would be a serious incident, who makes that assessment, what the escalation threshold is, when the public is informed, and who would do that independently of the government of the day. We've got a series of bodies like the National Security Online Information Team, DCIT, like the Defending Democracy Task Force, like the Election Cell, which I think are quite willfully opaque, which monitor information risks, but really no one knows what they're doing. The only detail that comes out is occasionally parliamentary questions that glean some information. And the UK is a real outlier in this. So among the Five Eyes countries, the other four have got published coordination protocols or mechanisms so the public understand what's being done. And I think Canada's is particularly instructive. At Full Fact, we've been calling for a long time for the UK to implement the Canadian incident protocol, where a panel of senior officials monitors, well, they assess if an incident threatens the fairness or integrity of a Canadian election, and where that very high threshold is met, this independent group can decide and notify the public, electoral administrators, and this is all underpinned by parliamentary scrutiny. So last year, a minister said that they're not going to implement this because of the systems in place, which raises the question of what their systems are. No one knows. So we put an FOI request recently to the Ministry of Housing, to DCIT as well, and they refuse to even confirm or deny if there's a protocol, or who's responsible, or who has decision-making authority. Not the document itself, but the nuts and bolts of it. because they said that would prejudice national security. And there clearly are going to be sensitivities here, but also I think there is a need to show the public that action is being taken, that there are safeguards in place, that the public can trust the system. And I think on that the government hasn't got the balance right. In his recent review, Philip Rycroft said that the state appears to hold the information it has close, and that more information would help the public to understand what foreign interference looks like. So we think that the bill should establish this statutory protocol, setting out who's responsible for it, what the thresholds are, and that's set out in one of Emily Darlington's amendments. I think also with that there needs to be wider transparency about these bodies, and we don't need to know exactly what they're doing, but there could be a website saying what their responsibilities are, who they're accountable to, what's actually happening here, as we have in Australia and New Zealand. Another reform which would help safeguard the system and also again show that action is being taken is around enhancing the Electoral Commission's powers. So the bill does do quite a lot to enhance the investigative powers. It increases the fining level, I think, to 500,000 has been agreed for each offence, and there'll be an information sharing gateway between the Electoral Commission and the police and other regulators, which has been calling for. But the key gap is that the Electoral Commission can't compel people or organisations to hand over information unless it sets up a full investigation. So it has to meet this threshold, which means that during a fast-moving election campaign, it can't quickly ask people to hand over information, so it can make an assessment of is there a coordinated campaign, what's happening on platforms in particular. So I think without this, the powers that will be introduced to the Commission are going to be quite fatally undermined. But we know the government is looking at the Rycroft Review recommendations around receiving information from other regulators. And we know that with other regulators like the ICO, like the Charity Commission, they have got these proactive information gathering powers. So it is quite an anomaly and seems like quite an oversight that this isn't included in the bill. The Electoral Commission's been calling it for years. The Laws, Democracy and Digital Committee called for it, the Committee on Science and Public Life, and most recently Philip Rycroft as well. So we would hope that that makes its way into the bill. There are a few amendments that were tabled at committee stage that would give effect to this, so hopefully they'll come back in report.
Thank you very much indeed. So now I think we've got a quarter of an hour for questions from our participants. So when you ask a question, I'm going to take questions in groups of 3, and when you ask a question, please say who you are. Questions, please. Oh my lord, yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Sanjay. I run an organisation called Targets Me. We do a lot of work on transparency, both in the UK and abroad. I would just emphasise that transparency of advertising almost comes with anything else. You need to be able to see the name of what you're trying to look at before you start doing much about it. We do automatically collect data from thousands of advertisers in the UK every month. And run this campaign, we can show all the we can show the messages, we can show the targeting. We've ruled, we know that campaigners actually do the right thing for the most part. They tell the truth, they talk about campaign issues, they promote themselves, they don't put actions that are attacking their opponents and so on. So we need to be very careful about just throwing the baby out with the bathwater at times as well, and kind of over-regulating for things that don't necessarily try and get as much transparency as possible, understand where the things are. I think the other thing to point out is in the conversation today is trying to make sure that we look at the right terms of what we're talking about. So there is a much bigger question of the political information environment around the way people are abused, harassed, the way the political tone is in the toilet at this point in time, the way the platforms do nothing about this sort of stuff, and there is no mechanism to deal with that. Whether that is in the scope of this particular bill is a question, or whether something else with this bill can get hands around is a relevant question to me. The things around harassment, things around transparency, and the way that campaigners behave feel like really good things to be working on issues about that. My final point, I know this isn't a question, but hopefully this raises some issues, is also just being careful that we don't, again, scare people out into things. One of the things that I have about regulating factual claims, for example, is it actually pushes people away from making them in the first place. If we have a mechanism whereby there is a committee that can review those claims and make rule on them, that may actually stop them in the first place, because the party lawyers and the party apparatchiks will say, don't bother making them in the first place. And we'll actually end up with less factual communication or comms than we would otherwise. So that would be my experience as somebody who's done political campaigns before. Don't do things that get you in trouble. If making factual claims gets you in trouble, potentially, don't make them in the first place. And that would be something.
That's interesting, because I think from what you suggest, I mean, we do need more statutory, we need more things to be statutory.
Yeah, it's we've kind of tested out. It's interesting. We've tested out one of the things we sometimes hear about, sort of election ad regulation, and it has our campaign. I often describe as a bit of a journey on deconstructing reasons why it can't be done. But one of the points is actually around sort of political appetite to sign up to it, and yeah, we've been we were quite blown away actually with the test we did at the mayoral election. In 2024, where we got 7 London Mayor candidates to sign up to a code for factual accuracy, including Sadiq Khan, the Green candidate, the Liberal Democrat candidate. I think there were 6 or 7 in total, and Tracy Brayman and Neil Kinnock sort of supported it, and ex-Prime Minister that I don't think publicly we can say. But it had a lot of support, basically. Yeah, you know, it's and we've also run, and sorry for anyone that was here at the last event that talked about it, but it's kind of important. The idea of can you do it in a sort of busy election period, with Lord Putnam who chaired it, we ran something called the Election Ad Review Panel, or which is maybe a bit of a strange name for it. I don't know how we came up with that one, but basically it was to try to demonstrate how it would work. We're full involved actually. How it would work in a busy election period. So we had a sort of bit like a sort of proxy ASA in a sort of quite fast way, sort of doing what the ASA Council for Commercial Advertising does with fact-based claims, which again we've done twice. We did it once in a general election and once as a pilot before.
I see 2 questions there. I've got more than that. Hello. A woman there and a gentleman there, and then a woman there. Oh, I've got 4 now, so we can take... Oh, my God, there's another one. Right. A woman there, quick questions, quick answers. Woman there, and then a gentleman with glasses. There with glasses.
My name is Hamish Pringle. I used to be Director General of the IPA and on the board of Asphalt Transport, which funds the self-regulatory system, and the Council of the Advertising Standards Authority. So my question really, and maybe I could ask Benedict Pringle an answer on this, which is that there was an enormous infrastructure of self-regulation in the commercial sector, as Alex said earlier, regulating bags of crisps claims and things like that. How can you take care, embrace that? How do you use all that resource? You know, the ASA is monitoring 50 million ads a year. You know, the TAP has to be pre-clearance on factual claims. There's an enormous number of assets there. How did you take advantage of that?
Okay, one more question. Woman there. Thank you. So, Justin, can you take the technology?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question because I think a lot of the things we've been discussing in this place recently, be it social media bans for under 16s, be it AI, be it deep fakes, all land back at the door of the tech companies, and of course they want as little regulation as possible, and to some extent have been encouraged that that is the world they're going to be in. But I think if you look at the amount of information they process on a daily basis, and the amount of money that they make, this is a very, very small thing for them to get involved in. And I think at the moment, actually, they do hold some of these adverts anyway. It's just that they're not available to an independent body. You know, I think the point that was also made about some of the harassment online is something that I don't think it's really within the scope of the bill, but the amount of disinterest from social media companies about the bots or whoever it is who just trots out absolute vile abuse against everyone in this room and probably many more outside it is something that they need to take responsibility for, and I think they've had it easy for far too long, frankly. So this is about political will as much as anything.
I'm going to try and weave harassment into the bill. Yes, you were going to ask. You've gone on to about ASA resources.
Sure. Hi, so I'm Benedict Pringle. I'm one of the, with Alex, the co-founder of Reform Political Advertising, and so AI is presenting a real problem in that it's going to help create a huge volume of misleading advertising, and so that is a massive threat that we've got on the horizon. Fortunately, AI can also be the thing that can help us identify when there is issues of misinformation going out in election advertising. And the Advertising Standards Authority have been pioneering in that space. And so there's lots of talent and expertise that if we were to set up this sort of regulatory body, we'd be able to lean on that expertise in order to work out how we can implement this and make sure that as the volume of advertising continues to increase, which Sam's excellent research shows that it does at every election, the volume of election advertising just goes up and up and up, and with AI it's just going to keep going up. We need to have a system in place to be able to monitor much more information and to be able to flag that to the regulatory system and also flag that to the tech platforms.
Zoe, teenagers.
Yes, can I just very briefly say something about pushback from platforms? So having done Speakers Conference and had the platforms in front of us, it is absolutely shocking, and I completely understand that point around that they are pushing back. They hide behind the idea, well, we don't know the intention of the comment, when all the rest of us can see that actually they are threatening that MP, and they also insist that the algorithm doesn't promote the awful content that we all know suddenly magically gets pushed at tens of thousands of people when really actually it probably should have stayed in the space over here. So I'm happy to work with colleagues on trying to address that, but I sadly think that it's probably outside of the scope of the bill, and the government has pushed that quite hard. On teenagers, I have 2 teenage boys. I understand completely the enthusiasm of teens and how quickly they respond to advertising, positive and negative. So the bill, I believe, actually starts to address the non-party political activist groups, but that's obviously not what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with single individuals. Now, they might be an influencer. They might be an influencer working with a party. And so I wonder if there's something there about actually how do you think about where those sort of branding arrangements happen between influencers and parties. But then also there will always be the lone person. It happens now in the analogue world, and I don't think we've necessarily got our heads around how to deal with it. And I think it will only get worse. It's a really interesting question that I'm not sure many of us have thought in depth about. So I'm interested to hear from many of the organisations who have had thoughts about this to maybe take it offline.
Okay, I see 2 more questions. Oh my God, I've got 4 now. 4, and that's it. And they're going to be really quick questions, really quick answers. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Chris Williams from NAGWT Teachers Union, but also a long-time election agent in Tower Hamlets. So experience everything.
Look at you.
The way of describing sort of truth often is used in the corporate sense, the truth, truth, the absolute truth, and nothing but the truth. First and last, though, strike this quite easily to everyone. And I think that the absolute truth is the problem. Party candidates will always tell the bit of the story that stays
you. That's a hard one. Yes, I see. Yes, gentleman there. Yep.
I wondered if it was on the misinformation, disinformation, is there anything that we learn from other European countries? Didn't Finland have a massive urge on this some time ago where they educated people?
Possibly, probably, maybe. Yes, a woman there with glasses.
Hi, my name is Julia Tom. I'm from the Press, which is the UK's sole independent regulator of the press. We have been tracking fake newspapers that have been, with the help of the public, they've been reporting them. Newspapers that might be called something like the, Tower Hamlets Tribune or something, that appears to be a local neighbourhood newspaper, but is actually completely political advertising.
To interrupt you, as a joke, actually, we produced something called the Misleading Times that we sent to various MPs. Anyone want to? There's some over there. But we're not against misleading, using the fake newspaper format. It's just if it's like misleading, it's not who it's from, not obvious who it's from. But sorry to interrupt you. I just thought I'd mention that because we forgot to do that. It's a bit of an ad stunt because we are advertising. Sorry.
We have reported several of these, but because they are not clear that they are actually political advertising. So we'd love to share this data if we can.
Oh, yeah.
And also speaking to holding platforms to account, and Hannah, as you so beautifully outlined what's happening there, and terrifyingly, I think for platforms, and all of this is profitable, right? And how do we hold them to account and track their bottom line? You asked a question about learning from other countries. In the EU, under the DSA, there is a system whereby if you're unhappy with the platform's content moderation decisions, you can take this to an external body. And the platforms need to pay for that. So it hits their bottom line directly. This is a section under the Online Safety Act right now, section 160, and it needs to be activated.
Okay.
And so I wanted to find out if anyone is considering activating this here in the UK as well.
Excellent. Final question, sir.
Sean Robertson, Unlock Democracy. I think obviously disinformation is going to change, and you legislate and it will change to get around it. What did the panel think of the Rycroft recommendations to have a minister and a permanent secretary effectively charged with responsibility in this area?
Okay, can I ask each one of you to make a final statement in which you address one of these questions? Benedict, I saw you nodding about something.
Yeah, so in terms of the question about misleading by omission, so not giving the full truth, giving it your partial account of it. In the commercial world, there is a rule which says you can't do that, basically. And so, and that would be the sort of thing where if you say, oh, we've opened 5 new hospitals, but you've actually closed 10, in a commercial world, you wouldn't be able to say something like that, and that would be something that would be struck down. So misleading by omission is an important thing.
And Full Fact calls that out all the time. Hannah?
I guess my comments are just on what you mentioned about this is triggered by what you said about people making money from it online. And that is really key, because I think there's a lot of people who I'm sure don't actually believe a lot of what they're saying online, but it's very lucrative. But I think I've struggled to understand how they're doing that. Like, trying to work out how this system exists is very difficult for anybody, let alone like the average voter who's like struggling working and like bringing up their kid, like whatever. Like, you cannot expect like people with their own lives to be able to unpick all of this. And yeah, I often hear people called like stupid, especially in Brexit. We'd hear voters labelled as stupid or not intelligent. I think it should not be down to individual voters to try and unpick like the myths and the lack of transparency around this stuff. And I'm still not sure how these people have been able to make full careers and a lot of money from spreading disinformation. And if I can't really get my head around it, how could I expect someone who's like not involved in politics to understand it either?
Justin.
Yeah, could I just slightly contradict what Benedict said about the question Chris raised, because the amendment we've got down is about actually having a reliable evidence base to support the facts put forward. Now, I don't, as much as in an ideal world we would want, every politician to put forward the whole story. I think, the history of politics tells us that that's never going to happen. You only need to spend 5 minutes in the chamber to realise that everyone puts forward the best version of their story, and I think it would probably have a dampening effect if we put the bar so high that people had to say everything, because actually that would make it more of a courtroom rather than a political debate. And of course, debate is about putting forward your strongest arguments and extenuating the things that you think are most positive. But I think the important thing from my perspective is that when you put forward things, there is actually some evidence base for it. It's reliable, and you can back it up, because I think that's the basic standard that we should hold everyone towards. And I just want to join on with what Hannah said about the online world, and it is right that a lot of the monetisation of online discourse is built upon division. It is built upon controversy, and until the social media companies decide to monetize in a different way, they're always going to have an incentive to bring the worst out in politicians, I'm afraid.
Zoe? So I'll pick up on Sean Roberts' point around the need for a ministerial role, and I absolutely agree. The reality is government really struggles with working cross-department, and all of what we've been discussing falls very much cross departments, and democracy is precious and it's worth protecting, and we know that it's under threat, and we know that people are losing trust, and we should all be incredibly concerned about that. And yeah, I think we should have someone whose day-to-day responsibility is making sure that our democracy is protected, because if the public loses trust in our democracy, then honestly all is lost, because it is fundamental to who we are. George?
Yeah, I think just to echo that, that there have been a lot of reports recently calling for more high-level coordination of the information environment, and maybe stepping aside from ministerial responsibility, the report we'll be putting out in June looks at information integrity more broadly. So this is about elections, but it's also about public crises. It's about how you manage information risks. So I think what we're looking for is a resilience centre to oversee those risks, to horizon scan, to coordinate social media platforms, government departments. So yeah, I think crucial to get the incident protocol and these reforms in the bill, but this is a much bigger issue.
Alex, would you like to conclude?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's been quite a lot of, in a short space of time, quite a sort of effort sort of putting all this together with everyone. So just wanted to thank everyone, and thanks everyone for such a sort of thoughtful and engaged conversation. I'm sure we could have gone for another hour based on what I'm hearing. I suppose that there seemed to be, this is a follow-on from the event in October that anyone was there that took part in that, and that was very much sort of setting the scene and surfacing a lot of the issues, I think, that the panel and Lord Putnam chairing it did a very good job of. And now we're at a really interesting inflection point, aren't we? I think I was talking about this kind of this interesting change in the sort of vote share in the UK, and this acceleration of technology. Everyone's just seeing month by month how much that's changing. I don't think that's overhyping it at all. And just a really interesting opportunity now. I think this has been, looking back on it, a really well-timed event, actually, in some ways. Just at the end of the committee stage, where actually we actually had last week the discussion on some of these topics, and actually sort of surfaced a bit of a sort of something to react to, I guess, from the government. I suppose it's just the call really now is just for us all to sort of ensure that we're taking this all forward and turning it into something into action rather than having a sort of talking shop, to ensure that we're getting MP support, and any MPs here to support the amendments that are put forward into the report stage. Yeah, I'd just like to really thank everyone for coming, so all the MPs and peers that are here, the Reform Political Advertising supporters that have come, there's people that have come from around the country, really appreciate that, as well as the sort of unsung heroes of the APBG sitting quietly in the corner that have facilitated the whole thing, the Fair Elections APBG, that is actually the biggest is it the biggest? It's the biggest. Okay, so that tells you something as well about actually MPs do think this is important. We just need to ensure that there is specific sort of support behind some of the gaps that we've identified. So thanks for everyone to coming, and also to Full Fact and the policy team for the brilliant work they did with Phoebe and George and team. So thank you.
Thank you.